The law of inheritance is of sufficient complexity that it becomes a fairly specialized field. I mean, if you just want to, if you just go, we have like these massive charts where you pluck in the blood relationship and the share. But overall, there are 11 cases where men and women inherit equally. There are 4 cases or 4 situations where men inherit more than a woman, or twice of what a woman inherits, like brother and sister. There are 14 situations where women inherit more than a man. And there are 5 situations when women will inherit and men don't inherit. So the very fact that the Quran required women to inherit was, I mean, it wasn't received without considerable fanfare. I mean, and there were, during the life of the Prophet and after the Prophet, there were considerable amount of resistance. But what was especially, what struck the context in this way, it rubbed people, where the 5 situations where women would inherit and a man wouldn't. So a woman would squeeze out the man in inheritance, and the 14 situations where a woman would inherit more than the share of a man. And for a tribal society, whatever a woman inherited was seen as a loss to the collective family or the collective clan or a collective tribe. Because whatever she inherits, she takes, and then it goes with her whenever she marries. So that's wealth taken out of the collectivity. What I think, to my mind, is the significant issue is the fact, the intervention in demanding that women be given a share, and that, as I said, in 11 cases, men they inherit as much as men. In the 14 situations where a woman would actually get a greater share than a man, and the 5 situations where a woman would get a share and a man wouldn't. The 4 situations where a woman would inherit less than a man, usually 1/2. The most clear example of that is siblings. In every one of these situations, the system in effect, the financial responsibility for the caretaking of a woman rested ultimately with a male relative. So in the old system, a sister, if a divorced sister or a widowed sister, could bring a cause of action against her brother, forcing her brother to pay her bills until she remarries. And I think you've heard me say this before. Now, what happens when you no longer have these causes of action which provided we were part of a social welfare system that made the financial obligations incumbent upon women less than those upon a man? It makes sense if a brother and sister, you would give the brother more because the financial obligations upon the brother are greater than the sister, including taking care of his sister. Of course, that begs the question, do we restore the social welfare network system of obligations in order to justify the equal shares? Are we able to restore that system in the modern age? How do you restore the sense of the cultural sense, the ethos, in which a brother would consider, because the law can't create an ethos. The law only can reinforce an ethos. But so even if you give a cause of action to sisters against brothers, unless in the vast majority of situations, brothers have a social ethic that tells them, I have to take care of my sister, and if I don't, I can't look at myself in the mirror, then the law intervenes in those exceptional cases where, for whatever reason, the social ethic fails to work. But if the social ethic is missing, having a law is a recipe for failure, because the law can't possibly go after every brother that fails to do their job. The law reinforces a social ethos. It cannot invent it. So the question that I have about not just the share of sisters vis-a-vis brothers, or in those four situations where women inherit half of what a man inherits, but in all the Qur'anic shares, the Qur'anic shares came with a straightforward logic. First, you pay off the debts. Second, you enforce the will. According to Sunni schools, you are free to will 1/3 of your property. Sunni and non-Sunni schools, that percentage, some said you are free to will all of your property. The majority of schools said you can't. You're not free to. For someone who has a share in inheritance, you are limited as to how much property you can give them. Anyway, these are fairly complicated matters of inheritance law. But there is a mismatch between the way inheritance law works today and the social network for supporting parents, supporting half brothers, half sisters, supporting a brother and sister. Do we apply the Qur'anic shares literally, mechanically, or do we try to understand the philosophy of the Qur'anic shares and apply the moral substantive philosophy. Again, we are hampered in this conversation by the dark shadow of colonialism, secularism, Westernism. Because I myself, when I hear that, for instance, in Egypt, that they're talking about giving men and women equal shares and not differentiating between the inheritance of a brother and sister. And I keep in mind that the government that's doing this is an authoritarian, despotic government. This reform, quote unquote, reform in the law is not a product of free and open debate, is not a product of symposia and conferences in which religious scholars and all types of legal scholars and sociologists and economics experts and anthropologists get together and have open discussion and debate and vet out the issue, and then ultimately society emerges on a consensus. No, it is the will of an ignorant military despot who has the education of an absolute idiot, a completely ill-educated, ignorant tyrant who just gets ideas in their mind and decides to earn brownie points with the West by forcing their will and calling them the great reformer, calling themselves a great reformer. Of course, I become indignant and I oppose the reform, regardless of whether I like the reform or not, but just because of where it's coming from. But this is where we are stuck, and that is why I see anyone that continue to embrace a despotic paradigm in Muslim societies as shooting Muslims in the foot, because then you are dooming us to this gridlock between the dynamics of despotism, where every idea, is looked at with great suspicion and mistrust, and we never go anywhere. But what is remarkable is that even outside the despotic context of Muslim societies, try to open up a conversation about any of these issues among Muslims, let's say, living in the West. Good luck. It is immediately, you are seen as non-doctrinal, someone who's trying to corrupt Islam, to westernize Islam. But it is fairly, it is more straightforward than that. Allah decreed shares. Either Allah decreed shares for reasons that only Allah knows, or Allah decreed shares for reasons that are discoverable to humans through a reasonable inquiry. That if we actually study the matter, we can come to discover and understand why Allah said, in this situation a mother gets this share, in this situation a father gets this share, in this situation an uncle gets this share, in this situation a brother gets this share. And then if we understand the why, we can look at the philosophy of the shares. And we can ask the question whether in a particular situation the logic of the law can better be served through adjusting the shares or through sticking to the traditional shares, to the Qur'anically stated shares. at least we can have a conversation about that. Because I mean, sometimes in practice, I see a share a mother takes, and I tell myself that's not fair. And in other situations, I see a share that a mother takes, and I say, well, no, that seems appropriate. Um, these issues, if we are serious about the Quran, deserves vetting, at least vetting. But especially that it is clear that at least at a bare minimum, the project, the Quranic project, was that it was going to categories of people that were have-nots, and was making sure that it empowers them. Now, is the Quranic project accomplished and done by the level of empowerment that people received 1400 years ago? Or do we say that the Quranic project must be ongoing and must be served in every way that we can serve it? But again, despotism and tyranny always corrupts this.